So I love stories of people making it through difficult times. It's like one of the things that I really enjoy. And so if you know anything about this woman, you may not recognize her face, but you probably all know her name or certainly the book she wrote. This is J.K. Rowling. She wrote a series of books called Harry Potter, turned into best-selling books. If you know anything about her life is, it's an interesting story herself. Because in one 7-year period of her life, her mom died, then her marriage ended, and she was left unemployed with an infant child. She had no idea how she was going to make ends meet. She had to go and sit with a social worker and ask for public assistance. She was diagnosed with clinical depression. I mean, there was nothing going right in her life. But every day she would go on a walk with her daughter in the stroller, and they'd go to this coffee shop, and while the daughter napped in the stroller, she would write. And she wrote and wrote and wrote. And when she had a couple of chapters written in her first book, she sent them off to 12 different publishers with great hope and expectation, and every single publisher turned her down. Her story is one of failure after failure after failure after failure after failure until finally one publisher took a chance, and then the rest is history, and she's now the wealthiest woman in England. One of the greatest best-selling authors of all time. Her story is a story, of course, of amazing resilience, right? It's one of the most important character qualities you can ever develop in life is resilience. So here's the definition. It's the capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of these 4 things: stress, adversity, trauma, or challenge. Here's what I want you to think about. First off, stress. Anything stressful happening in your life right now? Anything stressful going on? Resilience is needed, right? That's where resilience, it's the ability to bounce back in the middle of stress. How about adversity? Anything going wrong? Anything you thought was going to go this way and all of a sudden it's gone this way? It's like, wait, I thought this was my path. I thought this is what I was going to be doing. I thought this is what I was going to do with the money I'd saved. Now I have to do this with it? Are you kidding me? It's adversity. How about trauma? Have you ever experienced any trauma? Many of you have lived through childhood trauma. Some of you have lost people in your life that you thought you would never lose. Any challenging things happening in your life right now? If not, you all know, you're all smart enough to know that it will happen, right? You're not done. As long as you are alive, you're going to experience these things, and that's where resilience is so important. We need resilience. Because the issue isn't this. The issue isn't, will I ever go through challenges or stress or anxiety or any of these things? That's not the issue. The only question is, there are 2 questions. When will the next one happen, right? For some of you, it's going to be this week, and you're going to be like, thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks for talking about this. So now all of a sudden, I got to deal with it because you talked about it, right? And how will you go through it? Have you ever watched somebody go through adversity and get worse? You ever watched that? Have you ever watched somebody go through a really, really difficult situation and become bitter? It's almost like they throw an anchor at that point in their life. Now, time keeps moving on, but they can't move on. They're always looking back, talking about how horrible that person is and what they did. Time keeps going, and they never do. You ever seen that? You ever seen people live with this bitterness and anger that just never goes away because of what they've lived through? They go through some kind of trauma, and they never move on. You ever know somebody who's gone through trauma and their faith ended? I've seen that. I've watched people go through trauma, and all of a sudden they're done with God. It's like, well, obviously, God isn't a real God. Otherwise, he would have prevented something bad from happening to me. That's a very common thing. But the issue isn't how do other people respond to stress and adversity and trauma and challenges. The issue is how do you respond to stress, adversity, challenges, and trauma? How do I? I mean, that's the real issue, right? And some of you may say, well, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, right? That's my life. Sometimes, really stayed connected to God, and saw God, and sometimes the exact opposite. It just depends. The good news about this subject is that resilience is something you can learn. We can all learn it. It is teachable. It's a skill, it's like a muscle, and the more you add to it, the better your life will get. So we've been in this series for a little while now called Answers for the Stress and Strains of Life, and we're going to talk about this. How do you develop resilience, that bounce back when things get tough? Because if they're not tough today, you all know that it's going to happen at some point. So I want to ask you to open up your program. Inside, you'll find these notes. Would you grab your notes, grab a pen, something to write with? Super important topic as we continue this series, and we are going to jump right into this. Now, you can see there's 4 points. I'm going to break it into 2 parts. I already decided this. We're only going to cover points 1 and 2 this week. I'm begging you, if you can come back next week, to come back next week, because it's already written. I'm so excited about it. But I can't cut any of this. It's all so important. There are key things we need to address according to the Bible in order to bounce back when things are tough. So we're going to talk about first 2 this week and then the next 2. So the first thing, step 1, I put them into terms of steps, is I have to take care of my body, which is one of the first things ignored when people go through adversity or challenges or stressful situations. Most people don't think about this, and they don't think about it to their own detriment. I saw this cartoon recently on LinkedIn. I thought it was great. You wouldn't let this happen to your phone. Don't let this happen to you either. Self-care is a priority, not a luxury. So I wanted to ask you to imagine, if you were that person on the right there, where would your energy level be today? Is that indicative for some of you where you feel like today you are totally drained? Like you're almost running on empty? Some of you are doing great. I mean, right? We can be at all different places. All of us would be at a different place, probably. Like, this is the reality of it. Now, the reason why this is so important, and I'm only going to touch on this for just a couple of minutes because I just really want to get to the next thing that we're going to be talking about. I'm only going to talk about this because and what I want to say is, I was naive about this whole thing for most of my life. I thought for most of my life, the most important gauge to monitor in my life was my spiritual life. So I monitored that closely. I made sure that I was doing the things that would keep me deeply connected to God, and I thought, well, that's all that really matters. The body is really unimportant, and I treated my body like it's unimportant. I did not care for my body. Self-care was not my priority. Didn't even think about it. I became a workaholic. That meant less and less and less sleep. That meant certainly nothing remotely about eating healthy. Oh my goodness. I literally ate chocolate every day for years and years and years of my life. So it was like, that was my comfort. It was like, grab some more chocolate. I would sit down at the end of the hard day with a big bag of chocolate chips if I had nothing else in the house and just eat half the bag. I'm not kidding. So it was like whatever I had to do, because that's what got me through, and I wasn't taking this seriously. The only way I could function every day was these 2 substances, and I'm not joking. At my worst, there was always a case of Diet Mountain Dew in my house, and there were always multiple bottles of NyQuil. At my worst, I would drink 2 liters of Diet Mountain Dew a day just to stay awake during the day. And then at night, because I was so overwhelmed, I would drink NyQuil every night just to fall asleep. And I did that for years and years and years and years. And I thought, it's okay, because the soul is what matters most. Oh my goodness. I made an enormous mistake. I paid a huge price, because the body is so important that when God was writing the 10 Commandments to give to Moses to take down to his people, in the 10 Commandments he said, you know what, you better take care of your body and you need to rest. And if you don't rest, you're violating my commandments for your life. Jesus modeled it for us. Jesus, when his disciples were overwhelmed, he said, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. Look at this. And he said it because there were so many people and so many needs coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. You ever been so busy you didn't have time to eat? Some of you are like, I am never that busy, right? But you can get overwhelmed and you just let go of the things that are really important. And you all know the solution. So I'm not going to belabor the solution at all. All of you are like, yep, you got to exercise, eat right, sleep. Breathing, I don't have time to teach on it, but I want you to look up that phrase, 4-7-8 breathing. Did you know that God wired your body to literally have a stress reliever built in by breathing with 4-7-8 breathing? I've talked about it once. I use it every day. I don't use NyQuil. I breathe, which sounds so silly. It's like, Brian, we're all breathing. Well, go look it up and see for yourself. All right. That's all I have time for that one. It is super important. I'm not trying to diminish it, but when you're really in the middle of adversity and stress, this is what I want you to think about first. I want you to learn how to deal with your emotions in a very positive way. This is what I want you to learn. You have to learn how to deal with your emotions in a positive way. The most amazing, emotional, intelligent person I have ever heard of is a guy named Rudolf Erasmus. You ever heard of him? Of course you haven't. He is a pilot in South Africa. In April, he made the news. So he pilots one of these little five-seaters. And he was flying somewhere with 4 other people in the plane one day, back in April. And all of a sudden, he said he felt a cold sensation underneath his shirt at his hip area. And he thought, great, I spilled my water bottle. It's spilling all over me. He turned around, looked down, and saw the head of a snake receding back underneath his seat. He said, I had a moment of stunned silence. See, before departing that day, officials at the airport came up to him and said, we saw a Cape Cobra seeking refuge underneath the wing of the aircraft, and they thought they'd seen it crawl up into the engine. And so they opened it up, of course, searched everything. They found nothing. And they assumed that the snake had just gotten out and gone on his merry way. Oh, no, he hadn't. He had hidden in the plane. And now, when they were way up in the air, flying somewhere, all of a sudden the cobra decided to put his head up the back of the pilot's shirt. Okay? You got the picture? The pilot told the passengers what was happening. He called the air traffic controller and said, I quote, we have a bit of a situation. Right? We have a bit of a situation, declared an emergency, landed the plane, they all got out, that's what they're doing here. And sure enough, there was a 5-foot cobra under the pilot's seat. I just want to give you a heads up, okay? If I'm ever a pilot, we're ever flying somewhere, you're on my plane, and a cobra tries to slide up my back, we're all dead. All of us. We're all dead. I'm going first because I'm opening the door and jumping. Parachute or not, I'm gone. So you'll hear my scream, you'll see your screams. I don't care. I will not be thinking rationally in that moment, right? I'm gone, you're gone, we're all gone. So it's like, oh my goodness. So the Bible has a lot to say about our emotions and how we process emotions in those times of trauma. That qualifies as crazy trauma, right? The Bible says this, you know what a glad heart will do? It'll make your face happy. So in other words, when your heart and your emotions are really functioning in the way that God wants, and so you're experiencing positive things, it'll be reflected on the outside. It's like, oh yeah, it's going to affect your whole body. But then he goes on in the very next part of this verse, and he says, but you know what happens? A broken heart will crush your spirit. When was the last time your heart was broken? When was the last time your heart was broken? Maybe it was the death of a dream, the ending of a relationship, or something just fell apart in your life and now your heart got broken. Do you know how to heal a broken heart? The Bible has a lot to say about this. It actually has an enormous amount to say about this. So here are what I think are just really essentials, 2 essentials for this when your heart is broken. The first thing is you have to learn how to process your emotions. You've got to be able to deal with those in a very healthy way. If you're going to process your emotions, I really want you to think about the answer to this question. What did you learn about emotions in your home? When you were growing up, what did you learn about emotions? Some of you learned in the home that you were raised in that emotions are a really healthy thing, and you were allowed and encouraged to be frustrated, or to be angry, or to be happy, or to be sad. They handled those emotional expressions really positively. And then there are the rest of us who were not raised in a home like that. My dad was a Marine officer. He was a Vietnam veteran. Emotions were ugly to my dad. All of them. Even happy. If I cheered too loud in high school when the Packers were winning in the 80s, that wasn't very often. So it's like, right. My dad would yell at me to shut up. No emotions were okay. Sadness, anger, nothing. Even happy wasn't allowed. And I just thought, emotions are a bad thing. And I brought that into my adult years. Many of you have that same message implanted from the home that you were raised in. Your mom or dad communicated to you their emotions are inappropriate, or they're wrong, or they're bad. And you brought that into your adult years with incredible toxic effect. Because God created you as emotional human beings. And by the way, He is an emotional God. You're created in His image. The image of God is emotional. He never created us with emotions so that we could ignore them. He created us with emotions so we could pay attention. Here's what we know. I'm just going to touch on this. When you try and ignore or suppress your emotions, you only make those emotions stronger. It can impact your body. It can impact your mind. I didn't even have time to put that in there. It will impact your relationships. Everything goes wrong when you try and ignore or suppress painful emotions. Everything. Your body wasn't intended to hold painful emotions. You have to process them. Now, let me ask you this. When you go through adversity or trauma, do you have any emotions? Right, you go through you feel a lot of things. Now, you can suppress those emotions so strongly that you aren't paying attention to them. That doesn't mean that they're not there. So what I needed to get out of this was a framework, and here's the framework that I've been using for years. Some of you have seen me talk about this before. To process your emotions, I always start with either a notebook or a good friend. My wife will do this in a wonderful way for me. But I usually, the bulk of the time, either have a notebook or open up something on my computer, and here's what you do. This is what I do. This is what helps me. I write out the date that it happened. I write out all the don't worry about writing it down. It literally is on the back of your notes. So I write out exactly what happened. Everything I can remember. By the way, I find in my life, if I don't get it out of my head, then guess where it stays? And this is the right finger motion, right? You ever felt crazy because of what you've been through and you just rethink it and ruminate about it over and over and over again? I have to get it out. And I didn't for so much of my life. I just ignored it. I'm a huge fan of this. These are called emotions charts. So it looks like this. By the way, I made 25 copies of one. In case some of you heard me talk about this, you've never had one, they're on the back counter. You can have one. If you're watching online, just send me an email at the church and we'll send you one. We'll send you one. So you can have all these different emotions. And the reason I like this chart is you got different categories, but look at along the left-hand side, you've got little descriptors. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's medium, sometimes it's low. I cannot even tell you how many times I've sat down with a chart like this after a painful experience, and I've been only aware of one or two things I'm feeling until I look at a chart like this, and all of a sudden I notice all the other things I'm feeling. Now, some of you, that may sound stupid or crazy. It's like, Brian, how can you not be aware of what you're feeling? Well, if you're raised in a home where feelings are toxic and evil and bad, you learn to suppress all connection to what you're feeling. So this chart saves me. I can't even tell you. One time I sat down after a painful experience, started journaling, and I had 13 things from this list, and I wasn't aware of most of them. You gotta have a tool. This is my tool. I'm just sharing my tool. So you use an emotion chart like that, and you identify all your emotions, all of them. And then you write about why you feel that way. So, for instance, on that chart, and I just absolutely love this chart. I could say that I'm feeling hopeless. Oh yeah, hopeless, that's what I'm feeling. So then I put the word hopeless down and write, why am I feeling hopeless? And I write out why I'm feeling hopeless in this situation. It's because I have no power to change it. And I really do the hard work of thinking through what I'm feeling and processing it, because I know that this is true. If you name it, you tame it. Do you know this? That this is the way God has made your body to work? Some of you heard me talk about this before. I've talked about it once this year already. So a scientist said, this is your brain. If you take your hand, I showed you this a couple of weeks ago, you take your hand like this and you put your thumb like that and then you just fold it over. He said, this is your brain. So if you flip back this part of your brain, this is the amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, and all of input goes first into the emotional centers of the brain, not the rational centers of the brain. We tend to think that we are rational human beings who occasionally feel, and instead it's the opposite. God made us as emotional beings who occasionally think. That's how he made us. We are emotional beings who occasionally think. For instance, if a cobra started to crawl up the back of your shirt while you're flying in a plane, you would have an emotional reaction, not a rational reaction. The rational comes second. It comes second. The first is an emotional reaction, and you've got to control it and regulate that emotional reaction before you can get to rational. And here's what we know from science. This is so amazing. They can hook your brain up to a machine and watch what happens when you think and relive a painful experience from your past as the amygdala, the emotional center of your brain, is firing and firing and firing. And the moment you name how you're feeling, this part of your brain calms down and the rational centers of your brain start firing. They literally can watch the activity in the emotional center go down and the activity in the rational center go up. What does that tell you about how God made you to function? God made you to function by naming the emotions that you're experiencing because he wired your body to actually start to relieve the stress the moment you do. So, look in the Bible. Psalm 42:5. What do we see? And I could show you so many verses from Psalms. What does the psalmist do? He names his emotion. Why am I discouraged? Why is my heart so sad? And it's not just in the book of Psalms. Jesus himself did this. Some of you know that Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, he knew what was coming. He knew that he was going to be whipped and beaten and mocked and then led out to Golgotha, and he would have nails driven through his hands and feet. He knew the horrible tortures that were coming. And so he took Peter, James, and John. He went into this garden alone. He wanted to be with, we'll talk about this next week, he wanted to be with his friends and he wanted to be with his Father. And he told his friends that night, he said, look at this, look at the emotion he names. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Have you ever been in a moment in your life where you felt so overwhelmed with sadness that you just wanted to die? Jesus has too. He knows exactly what that feels like. Jesus knows exactly what that feels like. If you are in the middle of trauma or adversity or something super stressful, my question to you is, have you started to even unpack the emotions that you're feeling today? You know what we choose instead? We choose activity. We just make ourselves so busy we don't have time to think about it, or we choose addiction. And many times we don't choose addiction. The addiction is the body's default way of trying to cope with the pain that we're in. Do you know how powerful addictions are in this world today? Because we won't deal with the pain. So our body has to find a way to numb all the pain that we're trying to contain, and addictions grow incredibly powerful in those moments. You look at people who have lived through childhood trauma and horrible experiences, and a huge percentage of them turn to an addiction, right? Because processing the pain is incredibly hard. So for those of you going through something really stressful, have you taken any time to unpack what you're feeling? The second part of it is going to be really hard to write down, and I want you to write it down by faith, okay? And it is as fast as you can, you move back toward gratitude. I'm sorry to tell you this. By the way, if you have somebody going through something traumatic or difficult, do not tell them this, okay? Do not tell them. You cannot do this. It is one of the worst things you can do to a human being in pain. Say, oh yeah, that's awful. You got your mom died, J.K. Rowling, your mom died, now your husband left you and you're on home. You know what? What are you grateful for? It's like, are you kidding me? And we do it all the time. Christians do it all the time. Do not do it to another human being. It is only for me. You can only do this for yourself, okay? You can model it for others, but you don't tell people to do it. But it is incredibly, incredibly important, as fast as you can, that you move back towards gratitude. I'm not going to belabor this. We talk about gratitude. It's one of my favorite subjects. You know that gratitude, and we talk about it, improves your immune functioning, boosts all the happy chemicals in your brain, all the things that you're trying to get from a drug or a substance, your body will give you with gratitude. It'll give it to you. Softens hard feelings towards others. It impacts sleep quality. I could go on and on and on with all the positive impacts that come when we start to focus on gratitude. And let me show you one of the most challenging verses in the Bible. Look at this. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians, and he said, I want you to always be joyful. And I want you to never stop praying. And I want you to look at those words. Be thankful in all your circumstances. And this is why. This is what God's will is for you, who belong to Christ Jesus. Do you want to know what the will of God is for you? Is that in all your circumstances, you learn how to be thankful. I'll tell you right now, I'm always amazed when Christians talk to me about how easy it is to follow Jesus. I'm like, do you know that this verse is in the Bible? If following Jesus is easy, I pretty much can guarantee you haven't tried this verse yet. Because maybe it's just easy for you to go through trauma, stress, adversity, hardship, and be like, oh, Jesus, thank you. You're amazing. Thank you. But it's not easy for me. It takes me usually a little while to get there. Thankfulness and gratitude is not my first response when I'm in the middle of something really, really hard. And yet it's commanded, and here's what you always have to understand about the character of God. God will never give you a command that's bad for you, ever. You know that, right? Every command in the Bible is for your best. Every command in the Bible is for your best. So if God commands thankfulness, even in the middle of painful, difficult, awful circumstances, it's always because there's a reason for that. Obviously, it's essential for our healthy functioning, but the other element of it that I find is that it's a step of faith. For me, it is a way for me to express my trust in God in the middle of things that aren't going right. To me, it's connected to my faith. So, typical. I've said for years, I'm going to preach on how to handle winning the lottery. Okay, so that way, God will let me win the lottery, right? Because it's always the opposite. If I preach about something like adversity or difficulty or being grateful in the middle of tough things, you know what God will do? He'll let me practice it before I get here. So this last week, I flew to Tyler, Texas a week ago Tuesday, and I got to work in Tyler, Texas. My best friend lives there. My daughter lives there with my grandson and her family, and so I got to spend a week working there. And my flight back was this last Tuesday, so I missed all the last week. I'm not complaining about that. So sorry about that. I was very thankful to be in Texas while you all were getting snow. So Tuesday night, my flight was at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. That's okay, no big deal. So I get to the airport plenty early. It's Dallas I'm flying out of, which is a huge airport. Get back to Dallas. I'm sitting in the airport waiting. And the next morning, I have a huge training that I've been working on for a month up in Reedsburg. And so I have to get up early in the morning, next morning, drive to Reedsburg, run this 2.5-hour training that I've been writing the content for over a month. So it is a big deal. So I'm sitting actually in the airport. I'm ready. But if you know me at all, I like to rehearse, and I like to be super ready. So I'm just rehearsing. I'm sure it looked like a crazy man trying to, not speak my words out loud as I'm running through all my points. And then they call for the boarding. So I get on the plane. It's packed. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, everyone's on, and the pilot comes on, and he goes, there's an issue. There's an issue with the plane. He said, we're going to have the ground crew come and check it out. He said, the bathrooms are going to be open for you if you need to use a bathroom. I'm like, oh, that's never a good thing. When they open up the bathrooms, when you're sitting oh boy. So I'm sitting there waiting and waiting. We wait about 15, 20 minutes, and then the pilot comes on and says, yeah, there's an issue with the engine. We're going to have you all go back inside to the airport. We're going to see if we can find you another plane. So we all disembark, and we stand there for about 20 more minutes waiting and waiting. By this time, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and they make an announcement saying, yeah, we're going to book you on a flight tomorrow morning at 9:30 in the morning. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I literally thought maybe I could rent a car and drive through the night all the way back, but I'm like, nope, I know that would be stupid. I'd get there and I'd be incoherent. And I'm like, there's no other flights, there's nothing I can do. And so they say, go down to gate 20 and you can we'll get you set up in a hotel. And people run, and I'm like, what are they running for? So I'd never had this happen. So I'm sitting there and I'm texting my wife, stuck in Dallas, and I text my boss, I'm not going to be able to be there tomorrow to do the training. What do you want to do? So I'm like, oh my goodness. So I walk down to the gate. The line is everybody in the plane. And I hadn't thought this through very carefully. I should have been running when they took off running. So I stand in line for an hour and 15 minutes to wait to get a hotel. So then I get my hotel, and then they say, go down to the front and you wait for a cab. Well, apparently cabs stopped running in Dallas, Texas after 11 o'clock at night. I wait so long that there's only 3 people from the plane left. By the finally time they get me on this cab, and the cab driver drives like a madman into the middle of who knows where and takes me to the most rundown hotel that I have ever been in my life in Dallas somewhere. I walk in, and the smell of marijuana is really quite comforting in the middle of so much stress that I'm feeling, and it is overpowering. They get me into the room. The person behind the counter barely speaks English, and I walk into my room, and I turn the shut the door, and somebody has ripped all of the back of the lock mechanism off the door, so I can't even lock it. I go into the little bathroom area there. The wallpaper is falling off. The sink is you walk into the bathroom. The bathtub has a hole that they've tried to seal in the bottom, and you look up, and somebody's toilet above you has been leaking for a long time because they've tried to patch that. Right? You getting the picture? All right? So, and I can't go do my job, and I'm stuck. And so thankfully the sheets were clean. So I sit down on the bed and I'm like, all right, I got to get my attitude right. I'm powerless to fix any of this, right? Nothing I can do. Can't fix planes, can't do anything. So I'm like, I need to start with gratitude, especially since I'm talking about it on Sunday. So I'm like, what am I thankful for? And the first thing that comes to mind is, thank God they found there was a problem with the engine while we were on the ground. First thing, right? Matter of fact, that was such a big thought that I was really done. I've been on a plane that declared an emergency before. You ever had that? You pray like you have never prayed in your life in that moment. I've been on that one time. I was so grateful that they found the problem while we were sitting on the ground that I really didn't need anything else other than the clean sheets. I was grateful for that. It's like, clean sheets, that's it. Clean sheets, and the plane is, nobody crashed. And immediately my attitude spun around to humor and gratitude in the middle of adversity. There was so much I didn't know what was going to work out. What was my boss going to say? How is this going to work? All the people impacted by it. And it all worked out just fine. And I didn't have to be miserable in the middle of adversity because of gratitude. So here's what I want you to think about as we finish up today. Any area of your life where you need some resilience, are you dealing with any adversity today? Is there anything painful going on in your life right now? Really think that through. Some of you don't need to think about it. It's so fresh in your mind. It's so front and center. And the first thing, again, what God would say is, are you really taking care of your body? Because your body drives every other gauge. Don't be like me. Don't underestimate the importance of caring for yourself physically. Have you started processing the painful emotions from this experience? Have you done anything to start to unpack what you're feeling? Don't be like me for most of my life, just plowing through. Spend a little time thinking about it. What are the emotions that I'm feeling? And have you attempted gratitude? I'm sorry to ask that of you, but the Bible does. Have you attempted gratitude? Is there anything that you can be grateful for in the middle of this? And again, I'm not saying that to you. I'm just quoting the Bible because that's what God would say. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish up today. This God is an amazing God. We've been talking about him so much today, how he wants to fight our battles and be involved in our lives. And there's so much more that we're going to be talking about next week and how much more he's willing to do for us. I hope you can come back and listen to that. But we talk about God as a personal God. You can know him. Some of you have spent your life knowing about God. Who cares? That's just information. It will never change your life. This will never be meaningful till you go from knowing about God to knowing God, and Jesus is the key to that. Jesus gave his life on a cross for a reason. Because you and I have brought unloving things into this world. I'm no different. I have said and done unloving things my entire life. Stacked up a debt that I owe God that I could never repay, so Jesus came and paid my debt. He paid all of our debts. And if you will let Jesus, he will forgive you and he will change your entire future. He will put you in his family. He will begin to work inside of you to change things you could never change on your own. He will start fighting for you. And if you want his involvement in your life, it is a step of surrender. Say something like this to him. Say, Jesus, I give up today. I'm giving my life to you. Because I need you, and I know it. I've been unloving, I've done unloving things, and I'm not denying it. Would you please forgive me? Please. come make your home inside of me today. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, can I ask you all, as we finish, would you grab this little card out of your program and just take a moment to fill it out? If you ask Jesus to forgive you, here's a box right here. Just check that box. Let us know what you've done. Or maybe you renewed your commitment to him. Great. Let us know about it. Well, if you put this down, give us your information. We'll send you some stuff in the mail as our way of saying thanks for letting us know about that. If you want to help out with that homeless shelter, or you want more information, just put homeless shelter on this part, or on the comments part, and then as we get more information, we will share it with you as a church. It'll be our focus going forward. We'll be involved with this. And then just drop this card in one of those 2 offering boxes back on the back wall. Hope you can come next week for part 2, because we have only begun to talk about this. So thanks for coming. Hope to see you again next week.